Hey Luminary, it's Leslie Tagorda back with another episode exploring the intersection of astrology and leadership. In this episode, I am really thinking about our upcoming Aries season and all of the eclipses that we're just about to move into. The portal is already open, and how this Aries eclipse season is asking us to all face our fears so that we can break our fears down and to break through in our change making leadership. Listen in. Welcome to Star Powered Astrology for Changemakers. I'm Leslie Tagorda, your guide, a Hawaii-born Filipino Jewish astrologer who loves navigating visionaries like you through the spiritual journey of your work so that you can be inspired to lead by your chart and become the luminary leader you were born to be. All right, my friends, welcome back. Thank you for spending this time with me exploring the intersection of astrology and leadership and how we make our mark. Recently, I've really been thinking and exploring so much about this idea of fear and how it shows up in our work, in our leadership, and how we are building our businesses. Now, it's absolutely divine timing, a confluence of timing. With us already being in the eclipse portals, like eclipses have this ability to stir up so much fear in all of us. And then within the next few days, the sun will be moving into Aries, in which is called the Aries ingress. When the sun crosses the equinox point, heading north, that heralds in the astrological new year and spring across the northern hemisphere. And then that third confluence of divine timing. In my client work, I've been delivering on star powered position. It's one of my foundational trainings after Written in the Stars, where we start to apply and interpret our big three plus our descendant to position our brands, what, why, how, and for whom. And this week, we've been exploring the many sides of the moon and just how important our moon is in how we need to show up to create emotional security in our life and in our work so that we can do the risky things. Now, of course, being a leader, being a business owner is always about facing the unknown and taking risks. And so, how do some of us really step into courageously and bravely into taking risks into the unknown? And how do some of us, get stuck in procrastination or hiding or fear and letting the fear take over? And so I've really been thinking about how we can all start to face our fears and really use this Aries season and this eclipse season to use this portal to be able to step into regulate ourselves and confront our fears. So, in today's episode, I'm going to share with you a little bit of this Aries season, of course, and give you a preview of what's coming up the eclipse seasons. I'm going to have separate episodes specifically for each of the eclipses, so stay tuned there. And I want to share with you why this is the divine timing for you, for me, for all of us to confront our fears, and exactly why it's important if you are a leader. You could be a business owner, you could be a change maker, working from the inside out, whichever, why it's important for you to face fears and the 10 most common fears that you might be facing. Lastly, I want to explore how to mitigate your fears. Yes, using astrology. All right, ready to dig in? Okay, first of all, let's talk about just like the climate, the cosmic weather. What are we doing here and now? So at this time I'm recording this, we're still in Pisces season. As I'm recording this on Pi Day, March 14th, and we are still in Pisces season, but so close for the sun to leave that last sign of the zodiac. Pisces season, a season of mystery, a season of flow, a season of co-connecting with spirit and consciousness and higher consciousness to create. I love to think of Pisces season as this gestational season where we're not micromanaging things, but the gestational season where a womb, a metaphoric womb, is growing a new creature. And the metaphorical womb holder, the mother, is not micromanaging, okay, it's time to make the heartbeat. Now it's time to grow the spinal cord. Now it's time to grow the toes. That's not how that's not how the womb works, right? Like there's this mystery. And then when that creature is ready to emerge, that creature then passes through the canal, the portal, and sees its first light, takes its first breath. Of course, in astrological realms, this is when now the sun crosses over the equinox, moving up north and crosses over into Aries season. Tropical astrology, 0 degrees Aries, is our equinox, where we have equal amounts of light, equal amounts of day. It indeed is a day of celebration, no matter where in the world you live. Cultures for generations and millennia have celebrated this beautiful balance of night and day, where people cultures from all over the world have known this equinox day, and this year equinox is on March 19th, that when the sun rises on the eastern horizon at that midway point, humans for millennia have created tombs and shrines to capture the light of the equinox. And so there's so much significance when the sun moves into this equinox position, triggering the Aries season, 0 degrees. Now, when you think of this newborn creature, or maybe you think of a seed that has been underground, growing its roots in that kind of gestational period, and then all of a sudden it sprouts, that tender shoot that sprouts up above the ground, reaching for its light. That shoot is that plant, that little tender plant is so delicate. It is so fragile that can easily get trampled and harmed, just like a newborn baby. So fresh, so dependent, so needy. And what this really is telling us is that when we have these fresh tender shoots that are emerging from the ground, emerging from the depths of Pisces into the newness of Aries, these shoots, these newborns are tender and need protection. If they're handled too harshly, these tender shoots will perish. Hence, ultimately, Aries season is not only about rebirth, but it is also about survival. The survival of the body, the survival of one's identity, the survival of self and the ego to preserve the Aries I am. And so Aries season is just so significant because we are celebrating the astrological new year. And many cultures indeed start the new year at this time of spring. It indeed is a time of celebration and about survival. Now, when we think, over the last couple of years, the North and the South Node have been exploring the Aries Libra axes, with the North Node in Aries and the South Node in Libra, meaning as a collective consciousness, we are all moving towards that North Node, stretching into our collective soul potential of Aries, which is a little bit, it's hard to we have so much judgment and so many shadows associated to Aries. It's sometimes hard to see the goodness of Aries, but the goodness of Aries is being our best selves. It is doing the right thing. It's about going on our own paths. It's about being a leader where everybody is a leader, standing up for what's right, advocating. And that South Node of Libra, that the shadows of Libra that prevent us from being our best selves, go into all of the ways of people pleasing, maybe people pleasing as a fear mechanism, of fawning, or I'm jumping ahead of myself, but all the people pleasing of just keeping the peace because we don't want any conflict. But when we don't have any conflict or friction, just a little bit, just the right amount of friction creates lasting change. Too much conflict then, of course, goes straight to destruction. And so we're playing with these very primal energies of Aries, the me, and Libra, the we, and we're moving into the highest parts, the brightest parts of Aries, and we're falling away. We're leaving behind, cleaning out all of the dusty shadows of people pleasing of Libra. So we are at the height of that Aries Libra eclipse over, for the 19 months that the North and the South node are on that Aries Libra axes. When the North and South node moved into the Aries Libra axes back in July of 2023, that September October set of eclipses we had in that Aries Libra axes. And then now we're having the next set of Aries Libra eclipses, just harnessing and going in again, making sure that we're like gotten rid of all of our fears around leadership. We're doing it again. And then the nodes move out of Aries and Libra in January of 2025. And even though they move into Pisces and Virgo, we have one more Aries solar eclipse at the end of March in 2025. But this is where the sun and moon are going to be in Aries, but then that North node has already moved into Pisces. And so that eclipse is not going to be a total eclipse. That lunation, the new moon, is going to be pretty far from that North node. Of course, you probably already know that these eclipses happen when we have a lunation, like a full moon or a new moon, that's very close to the nodes. And so typically we'll have two sets of eclipses each time of year, each year, and each set will have two. And it's during these eclipses that it feels like we are being accelerated. I like to think of eclipses because they just have this wild, untamed energy. They feel almost Uranian in nature, allowing us to quantum leap so that we don't have to be taking linear steps that if I get to point A, then I have to go to B, C, and all the way to Z. No, we can go from A to Z all in one shot during an eclipse. Now, on like kind of mundane astrology, meaning the astrology of the world, eclipses have always been very, very scary because generally an eclipse tends to impact the leaders of a nation or a country or the leaders of a community. But we're not talking about those kinds of really like high leaders. We're not talking about that. I like to think that there's nothing to be scared of in eclipses when we are intentionally and purposefully using these energies for how they want, right? If we're avoiding and hiding and running away from, well, if rain clouds are still going to come and we're like afraid to go out in the rain, it's not going to stop the rain from coming. We just get prepared. Just like we can't stop these eclipses from coming. So how do we prepare and intentionally decide to use this energy for our good? And so when we think about this eclipse energy and facing our fears, this portal is asking us to confront our fears. Aries season is because Aries represents fear with just the Aries is ruled by Mars. And when we think about the Mars process is to cut, it's to separate, and ultimately it's to energize. It's really easy for us to judge Mars and get stuck in very traditional meanings of Mars. And Mars can have a really bad rap of like always wanting to fight. But Mars, we also need Mars to be the warrior, the protector, the defender. And so if we can look at the spectrum of how Mars interacts, where at that lowest vibration, the shadowiest part of Mars, we can look at the rage, the fear, the anger, and the resentment. Those are all like kind of lower vibrations of Mars. But when we rise Mars up and we turn all of that anger and that rage and that fear and that resentment, we can turn Mars over through boundaries and through activating our voice and through speaking up and for doing the right thing and standing up for what is right. Then we can use Mars to activate, to advocate, to motivate, to energize. And that's why we need Mars in our leadership. We need that warrior energy. There's so many different types of warriors. Not all warriors are here to fight. Some warriors fight with whatever their sacred weapon is, whether it be the pen or the microphone or humor or even some nunchucks, if that is your sacred sacred weapon. But so when we think about Aries and its need to be, its need to protect, its need to protect for survival and to stand up for what's right. And then we put the eclipse portal, which is asking us that Libra lunar eclipse that happens on March 25th to get rid of all of our people pleasing tendencies. And then the April Great American Eclipse, I call it the Great American Eclipse simply because it's going from the west coast of Mexico all the way to the eastern seaboard of Canada. It's cutting the North America straight across, well, not straight across, kind of diagonally across, but that's the reason why I call it the Great American Eclipse. Anyway, back tangents. Um, this that Aries eclipse that is conjunct Chiron, don't worry, I'm going to be talking a whole episode on that, is asking us to step into our vulnerable, wounded leadership. I know the wounded leadership, it's a little bit of a trigger for people. I will explain later in another episode what I mean by wounded leadership and why wounded leaders who have worked on their stuff, worked on their fears, are the types of leaders that we really need in the future. And so this Aries season and this eclipse portal is asking us to confront our fears. And Aries, we are getting curious with Aries and how it represents our fear and rage, but how can we transmute that and lift up this Aries to its highest? Because that's what we need. We need the lightness of Aries to activate, to motivate, to stand up for what's right, and to defend so that we can become the leaders we are born to be. So obviously, you know on an intellectual level why it's important for you as a leader, you as a change maker to face your fears. Because when we're not facing our fears, it's so easy to get stuck in people pleasing. It's so easy to get stuck in freezing or avoiding. It's so easy to get stuck in just reacting and fighting and causing conflict for no good reason, like the kind of conflict that destroys and consumes instead of the kind of conflict that is constructive, right? When we think about fears, we can group the reaction to fears into, you've heard this before, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fight, of course, is where you're just fighting. Sometimes you think it's a good reason that you're fighting, but ultimately, if you're destroying and hurting innocent people and not being constructive, that fight is a terrible, terrible reaction. Or you fly away, you avoid, you hide, which sometimes we need to do, especially if we've developed this flight as a survival mechanism. But in our businesses, if you're always avoiding conflict, people might not be paying you, or they might not be paying you on time, or you're not rising up to opportunities, or you're just hiding and nobody can find you, right? So we don't want that. Or then there's freeze, where you're just kind of stuck in the moment, where you can't get out of your patterns and nothing is happening. You're just spinning your wheels, doing the same thing over and over again. And then ultimately, the last one, the fear of and how it shows up as fawning, that ultimate people pleasing, just doing whatever anybody asks of you, bending over backwards, giving more than you're receiving, holding responsibility and accountability for others when they're not willing to do their own work. It's terrible when you start to look at all these ways fight, flight, freeze, or fawn show up in your work. So, of course, as a leader, of course, as a business owner, of course, as a change maker, it's so important to be able to confront your fears in a way that allows you to move from just reaction, like primal reaction, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, now learning how to regulate your emotions so that you can take a beat and respond. That is ultimately what I am striving to do myself and to teach other leaders how to harness their astrology to face their fears through recognizing their gut reactions and their fears, moving into emotional security by being able to regulate your emotions and your nervous systems, and then moving forward and really confidently confronting the things that you thought were scary. Because ultimately, facing your fears and doing something scary, it's not that you don't have fear. You're just doing it anyway. I was sharing earlier in my group when we were talking about the moon sign, about all like my primal fear is that I'm just not good enough. I have fear of worth. My fear of not being good enough and my worthiness leads me straight into comparison. And so, anytime I perceive myself to be with somebody that I think is higher or better than me, which is a lot of people, it's terrible how that shows up. I oftentimes go into avoidance and hiding mode. But I realize that if I'm always hiding, then I'm never going to be able to rise up to the opportunities that are presented for me. So, for example, you might have heard that I'm the upcoming Astrology Hub Inner Circle astrologer for the lunation of Aries. And I've been on a couple of Astrology Hub podcasts lately doing some recordings. Last week, I did a recording with the great Christopher Renstrom, who's written multiple books. He writes for the SF Gate. He's just this titan of astrology. And I hadn't yet met him, and we came into the Zoom recording studio, and I was beside myself. I was so nervous. I was so scared. I had to practice all of my self-regulation tools to show up and be able to speak up. And even when we were doing the recording, it probably took me a good 45, 60 minutes until I could convince my brain that I am worthy. I am there not to be another Christopher Renstrom, right? Because I went straight into the comparison. Oh, Christopher knows all these wonderful like stories about mythology and classical traditions and classical astrology. And I started getting scared and biting my fingernails and going, oh my gosh, what do I have to say? What do I have to add about that? And then I finally remembered Amanda did not invite me to be another Christopher Renstrom. She invited me to be Leslie Tagorda, to speak about astrology in my own way, to contribute my own perspective, my unique perspective that is completely different from Christopher's. It took me 45 minutes to get there. But what I'm grateful is like, oh, believe you me, I dissected all my reactions and how I could have done better. Why did I react that way? And it was such a learning lesson for me so that the next time I am placed with somebody who I perceive as being better than me, that I can go in and say, you know what, Leslie, you are here for your unique perspective, not to be a clone or a duplicate of that other person. And so I was talking to my group and I was like, you may see me as somebody who's brave and who shows up and who's, this really wonderful leader and mentor, but I am also scared. I am scared all the time. And yet I rise up and take opportunities, rise up into opportunities because I don't want to be stuck. I don't want to be in place. I want to keep growing and making massive change. So, yes, I am scared all the time. So one of the things that I'm doing we're talking about the moon sign in my group, but then also in Star Powered Circle, next week, we're opening up our 10-day eclipse challenge where I'm guiding the members of Star Powered Circle through 10 days of exercises to face their fears based on the 10 common fears of leadership. Because how can we be leaders if we're stuck in any of these fears? But I have a very precise way of how I want people to integrate and start to notice their fears, because simply throwing somebody into the deep end of the pool when they can't swim is not a way to overcome a fear. That's going to actually cause more damage. And so when we're looking at our fears and understanding our triggers and our reactions and understanding where do these fears come from, understanding their root causes, understanding the patterns, the unconscious and subconscious patterns that we are just cycling through because they're unconscious. How do we bring them into consciousness? How do we look at how we've been stuck in these cycles? How do we assess and diagnose how they've kept us back? And how do we explore a new way to respond? Well, guess what, my friends? When people say doing the work, quote unquote, doing the work, this is what we mean by doing the shadow work. Understanding your fears, naming your fears, knowing where these fears come from and their root causes, knowing the unconscious patterns and reactions that these fears cause, understanding how these fears have kept you back, and then deciding on a new way to respond and practicing that, right? These patterns are built in. These patterns are created from our very first experiences of life as that newborn that needed protection. We have no memories of that. But you know what? Those patterns are ingrained in us. And then the lived experiences that we have all had to endure from childhood experiences, from school experiences, all of the different traumas that have then shaped and patterned our brains. Hey, it's not our fault. But now that we are older, it is our turn to assess and decide on how we want to change and how we want to change that response. And so this is doing the work. Now, remember, when we are looking at our emotions, so getting curious with our fear is, of course, the first step to then change how we're going to work with our fears. But the second step to mitigating our fear after we get curious and go deep and explore all of the ways our fears have shaped us and deciding how we want to respond differently. The second step is to get emotionally secure. Okay. And this emotional security, you can call this nervous system regulation, you can call this healing, you can call whatever you want to call it. But basically how I see it is that this is creating your emotional security blanket. And you can get a lot of information from your moon sign. Now, your moon sign, you've heard me talk about this, I'm sure, before. Your moon sign is your emotional gatekeeper. When we're in flow and we're going about doing things or crafting new offers or having new ideas, we get inspired first by spirit. That is fire. Spirit inspires us with a fantastic new idea that we could explore. Ooh, do we want to do this a cool inspiration, well, then that then goes into our logical mind. So we can think about it, so we can strategize, so we can rationalize and figure out all the things that we need to do. Well, from the idea, the rational, intellectual idea, before we can take action on it, and the action through our hands that make things happen, through our feet that allow us to move forward, from our voice that allow us to speak, all of those actions are earth actions. They're embodied actions to manifest in the physical world. But from intellect to action, it has to pass through our heart center. And this is the domain of the moon and your emotions. And so I look at this domain of the moon, these emotions, as the gatekeeper. These are the security, the protectors. And your heart, your emotions are saying, this idea, is it safe to do? Will we be safe? Will our identity be safe? Will our ego be safe? Will our feelings be safe? Will our body be safe? Are you sure we're going to do this? Because this is new, this is unknown. And ultimately, everything scary, the reason why it is scary is because it's unknown. If it was known, even if it's something that's painful, at least we know that pain. So that's easy. It's comfortable. We know what it is. And the moon is going to be like, okay, well, we know what that is. Let's just go there because that's easy. No, 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 no. This is where our emotions can either make or break us. So if we are feeling insecure, emotionally not secure, meaning I don't know how to take care of myself, I don't trust myself to get back up if I fall, I don't know how to protect myself, I don't know how to defend myself, I don't trust my own abilities, or I'm not good enough. All of those things that create that emotional insecurity will cause us to stop, freeze, fight, flight, fawn, or it's going to make us make decisions that are not of our highest good. We are going to react. Okay. If we're not feeling secure, we are going to get stuck and stop, or we're going to make decisions based on fear. When we're making decisions based on fear, it never gets us to our highest path. Okay. That's the insecure emotional security guard, the gatekeeper. Now, when you're a gatekeeper, when you are emotionally secure, because you trust yourself, you know that even if you make a mistake, you can easily get back up because you trust yourself so much. You don't even think that there's such thing as mistakes. They're just learning lessons, that you know that even if had heartbreak or loss, that you love yourself, that you have enough support, that you're always going to be able to do it. Well, your emotional security comes from feeding and nourishing your moon sign. Whatever your moon needs is what gives you emotional security. So, for example, I am a Sagittarius moon. I need freedom. I need choice. I need to be put into situations where there is so much diversity and inclusion. This is a thing about me. If I am in a situation where it's kind of a homogenous group, like people, like only one type of person, whether it be like all men or all women or all like, people of one type, I feel really, really insecure. I don't know what it is about me. I think that's why I've lived in Hawaii, I've lived in San Francisco. My friends are of all ages and creeds and races and orientations and religions. I thrive in places that are diverse. I thrive when I'm free to make my own choices. Now, maybe you have a Scorpio moon. That Scorpio moon has very different needs than a Sagittarius moon. That Scorpio moon needs to be able to trust themselves, needs to be able to know what their intuition, needs to be able to go deep and have their own inner power. That Aries moon needs to be the best, needs to be the first. Those Taurus moons, they need comfort. They need physical, tactile comfort and prosperity. Gemini moons, they need to be heard and understood. The Cancer moons need to be emotional and sensitive, as well as very create a sense of belonging, like a home. Who's next? Leo moons, they need to be creative and they need to know and be able to accomplish what they know to be true. Virgo moons, they need routines, they need organization, they need that wholeness, they need to know that they are well mentally, physically, spiritually. The Libra moons need connection, intimacy, beauty. And then I talked about the Sagittarius moons, I talked about the Scorpio moons. Capricorns, they need to feel like they are the experts, that they have their lived experience and their inner authority, that they hold the wisdom and they are successful. Then after Capricorn, it's Aquarius. Those Aquarius moons, they need to feel like individuals. They need to feel like um, they can be exactly who they want to be and be as strange as they want to be, that wild genius, but then still be accepted, similar to those Cancer moons. And then lastly, those Pisces moons. Oh, they need to feel, they need to be taught to understand all of that empathy and those feelings, and to be able to separate their own feelings from other people's feelings, so that they don't cut themselves off from all of the overwhelm, because they feel so much and so deeply. And so when we know the needs of our moons, and I've just given these really teeny tiny little tastes of what your moon needs, your moon, when it's nourished and when it feels safe, is then able to go off and do the scary things. Because when that moon, that emotional security guard who's determining who's going to get past and take action, right? That moon is saying, "Oh yeah, I can do that. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling resourced. I'm feeling nourished. I'm feeling alive. I feel that I trust myself. I can take care of anything. Let's go do it, even though it is scary." Okay. So our moon shows us what we need to nourish it. But if we take it to that next level, also how we need to give ourselves regulation. Okay. So regulation, people have been doing tapping lately. Maybe there's breathing exercises, maybe there's meditations, maybe there's singing. But regulation is basically getting your body to calm down when you are in those states of anxiety or fear. Anxiety is just a lesser level of fear, but it's essentially all the same thing. When you think of anxiety or rage or fear, it's all a dysregulation. And knowing your moon sign allows you to then create that emotional security so that you can go do the scary thing. Now, to feel secure, I've kind of given you some guidelines, but it is absolutely a practice and a skill building exercise. It's something that you have to do over and over again, that each time you do it, you'll get stronger. Each time you do it, you'll nip those triggers much more faster to help regulate your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual fears. Now, fear or trauma responses, right? As I said, can show up as fight or flight or fear or fawn. But as you're experiencing this, if your fear is really truly overwhelming and you're feeling triggered or experiencing trauma, please, please, please seek professional support, because all of this work, whether you have severe trauma or not, is work that is done together to be witnessed. Now, to feel this emotional security is again to feel the right type of stretch and challenge. You want to not stay in your comfort zone, but you don't want to go all the way overboard. You have to stretch just beyond your comfort zone so that you can make the greatest lasting change. So now, the third part. Once you've gotten curious and brought awareness to your fears and how it's impacted your work and your leadership without judgment, Then you've learned how to manage your fears so that you can feel emotionally secure to create that emotional secure heart space that allows action. Well, of course, now it's time to take action to confidently confront your fear. To confidently confront your fear takes some of your Mars. So, your Mars shows you what is your style of warrior. Right? So I have a Taurus Mars. So my style of warrior is very, very peaceful. It's very, very slow going. I'm definitely not somebody who is going to throw a punch. I literally have dreams of like, I need to throw a punch and my arm just won't move. That is not the type of of warrior I'm going to be. So you can get curious with your Mars sign and see what kind of warrior. But then also you look to your Venus sign because of your values. Now, your moon shows us some of your personal values. Your Venus shows you what you is one of the keys to your values. There's other value keys too. So, but if you know your other value keys, if you don't, that's fine. Look to your Venus, look at what you value, because you need to understand what you're going to stand up for. That's the values, and how you're going to stand up, how you're going to be that warrior to defend, and that is Mars, so that you can confidently confront. Now, to confidently confront is to perform an action out in the world. This action is going to be in direct opposition, confrontation, to the fear, and is meant to challenge you to confront your fear. Again, just the right amount of challenge. Now, these tasks that you are here to do to confidently confront, you can start little by little and practice. And so, as I go over the 10 most common fears to visibility and leadership, maybe you'll think of an action that is the opposite, that confronts that, based on your own style, Mars of warrior, and based on your values, personal values, social values, and values that you have gained because of personal hardship or challenge. Of course, Moon, Chiron will give you information on places of challenge. Your social values come from what the impact you want to make. Personal values can come from Venus as well as the Moon. So, again, as you confidently confront, you are not confronting just to fight. You are confronting to stand up for what's right and to defend and protect, not to destroy. Defend, stand up for what's right, and protect. Okay, my friends. So finally, let's take a look at the 10 most common fears to leadership and being seen as a leader. Now, these 10 fears are the 10 fears that we are going to be exploring in Star Powered Circle. So if you are a member of Star Powered Circle, this is a preview of the challenges that I will be offering out for you to get curious with, to feel secure with, and to confidently confront. So the number one fear of being a leader is, of course, the fear of failure. Now, the fear of failure can show up in many different ways. It can show up like how it shows up for me, not being good enough, where you're always comparing yourself, or just plain out being wrong. So when you have fear of failure as a leader, you worry about making mistakes and not meeting expectations. And this can really stop you from taking on roles or opportunities. So do you resonate with fear of failure? Now, similar to fear of failure is the imposter syndrome. So number two, imposter syndrome, where person who has imposter syndrome, and similar to, you'll see that they all have overlaps, right? The imposter syndrome also has that I'm not good enough, where you might feel underserving or doubt your own abilities, even when you are already achieving success. And if you have imposter syndrome. This will limit your confidence in leadership. Like you won't even go after them because you're like, oh, who am I to say that I'm a leader? I'm not good enough. So if that's you, you have imposter syndrome. Now, this is another fear of mine. Maybe it's a fear of yours. The third fear is fear of criticism. Whew. Now, if you have the fear of criticism, you fear judgment, you fear negative feedback, you fear doing something wrong. I have this fear of criticism. Like, I don't want to say anything that's going to make somebody mad, or if somebody posts like a negative comment in like YouTube or Instagram, it completely derails me. So I am still working on this fear of criticism. And if I could confront this fear of criticism, I'm sure I would take even bigger and bolder moves in my change making work. What about you? Okay, number 4, lack of confidence. Now, a lot of us struggle with lack of confidence, self doubt, questioning our capabilities, low self esteem. You can see the echoes, you can hear the echoes of this confidence with imposter syndrome, with the fear of failure. But this lack of confidence really relates to not having any courage. That low self-esteem comes from um, no self-compassion. Okay. And so if this is you, how can you look at the lack of confidence? How has it held you back? Number 5, fear of rejection. This one's a big one, right? When we have fear of rejection, sometimes we don't even apply for that position or that grant or that opportunity because we're so afraid of being rejected. And that fear of rejection comes as like maybe people are just not going to accept me or support me or love me, whatever the root of that fear of rejection. So if you have that fear of rejection, how can you flex your muscle? Because rejection is just part of the game. One of my earliest mentors when I first started my business back in 2004, Alan Ovson. I don't even know if Alan Ovson, if he's retired yet, but I just remember way back then, he always told me rejection versus selection. That meaning that if you're rejected, it's not anything about you. It just means that the other person needed to select somebody else. And so to separate the personal attack of rejection. And so if you have fear of rejection, how can you get more comfortable with rejection? Because rejection is just part of life. Number 6, fear of being vulnerable. Now, I've been really digging Brene's Brown Dare to Lead, and she talks about vulnerable, compassionate leadership. And oftentimes, especially when there's been a lot of trauma at a young age, vulnerability, it wasn't safe. It was like being protection and being defensive was a survival mode. But now, as we are grown-ups, when we are creating the businesses and the leaderships and the work that the leadership and the roles that we want to create, how is being vulnerable and open, learning to open ourselves up, really an asset? And so, how can we face our fears of intimidation or judgment or exploitation to really get over these fears of being vulnerable? Right. So, how do we get into those roots of where we might have been intimidated, where we might have been judged, or maybe where we've been exploited, so that we can open up into being a vulnerable leader? Fear 7, comfort zone resistance, also known as the fear of the unknown. We talked a little bit about this earlier, about how almost all fear as a leader comes from this place of doing the unknown. Like if we've been to a place over and over again, we know what to expect, we know where to go, but if we're traveling to somewhere new, ooh, that can bring up a lot of fear. And so how do we confront this fear of the unknown so that we can step into our leadership. Because when we do new things, when we rise up and keep on stretching forward, all of that is going to require us to leave our comfort zone. And how do we face that? Okay, number 8, fear of conflict. There's always going to be conflict whenever we are running a business or being a leader. There will always be disagreements. There will always be times when people, don't agree with us, but the beauty about conflict is that conflict always creates change. And we are always going to be asked to navigate conflict. And if we're afraid of confrontation, this is a major obstacle because we start people pleasing or we keep the peace and nothing happens. And so this used to be a really big one of mine early in my career. I remember the fear of conflict. I wouldn't even ask people to I wouldn't even be able to ask for people to pay me because I was so afraid of confrontation. I would have all of these like past due invoices. I'd be like struggling with money. That was just one way of fear of conflict. That's how that showed up. Okay, number 9, fear of responsibility. Yes. Being a leader means that there are more responsibilities, more choices, more accountability and expectations that you will have to accept. And as being a leader or as a business owner, you can mitigate that by understanding what responsibilities you want and what you need to delegate. And so, of course, fear of responsibility, if this is something that you have, well, how big are you going to be able to grow your brand, your leadership, your business? And lastly, this is the one, fear of success. Is it a surprise that so many people are actually fear of success themselves? What if people found out? What if you found out that you are already successful, that you are already powerful? What is it about success that you might be afraid of? Are you afraid of the extra pressures that might come with it, or the extra visibility that might come with it? What is your version of fear of success? Okay, so those are 10 fears, and it's likely that you have probably almost maybe all 10 of them. I know I can relate to all 10 of these. And so ask yourself this eclipse season, how are you going to get curious with the fears that are the most present for you, and how they show up and where they came from, and how you can decide to, what are your reactions to them that you can decide to react in a different way? Then I hope that you can then learn what you need to feel emotionally secure, looking at your moon sign to understand how to nourish it, looking at your moon sign to learn how to regulate yourself. And then lastly, how can you confidently confront your fears? Looking at your personal values, looking at your social values, looking at the values that you've gained from hardships, and looking at your Mars, how you are meant to be the warrior. So, my friends, this turned out to be a much longer episode than I thought it was going to be. I guess I had a lot to say about fear. I do honestly feel like when I am working with my clients one-on-one, we spend so much time reframing judgments and fears and getting to those roots of those fears and plucking them out and assessing them and asking and getting curious with what this fear is here to teach us and what the gift of this fear is. Because ultimately, everything that you've learned to overcome this fear and doing the work is your gift of leadership and contribution. So, my friends, I hope this Aries season and this eclipse season, you are inspired to break down your fears so that you can break through into your change making leadership. All right, my friends, more soon. As a human design projector, my energy shines more brightly because of people like you who share my work. If you enjoy this podcast and want to help build a movement of innovative astrology and leadership and spark the intuitive revolution, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, or better yet, share this podcast with your change-making besties. We will all shine brighter together as we create the future we want to see.